I got some important things that I want to talk about today. Let's start with a story. Several years ago, I was working in the hospital, and there's one patient who kind of ignored the staff. You'd be at the door, you'd knock, you walk in and you talk, and just kind of ignored and wasn't really acknowledged until that patient needed something, and then would reach out and ask for what they needed. But normally they kind of ignored the staff. And as a result, this patient was in the hospital for a while. And as a result, the staff started to ignore the patient and wouldn't engage, and only went into the room at very minimal times, just when they needed to do something as well. And it was very almost like dissonance, like there's just separation there. So I remember the moment that when I was working with that patient, that there's an energy shift that changed. That just all of a sudden there's just like this aha moment, and this engaged, and there's this look towards me of like, okay, just okay. And then slowly from there, our relationship grew. Not in a relationship as in we became best friends. It was still a very client professional relationship, but we had more of a rapport that we had with each other. And just what changed is this client, when they were in bed and they were shifting in bed, they're very strong, and they had the ability to move very easily in bed. And I had just been in a couple other rooms where people were not able to reposition themselves in bed. They didn't have the strength, they didn't have the core, they didn't have the flexibility, and we had to basically lift them and put them in new positions and help them transfer in and out of bed. And even though this one client that I was building rapport with had more diagnoses and more health conditions that in theory would tell you that they would need more support, but they didn't. So what made that shift is, in that moment, I said, if everybody who I worked with could move and shift in bed like you, life would be so much easier. Us nurses, we wouldn't be hurting our back as much, and you can reposition yourself in bed, which means that you aren't getting the same bed sores or the same circulatory problems and all the other things. And I didn't really go into that sciencey part, but I just said, if everybody who could move in bed like you, imagine how great that would be. And that was that moment that initiated that shift of you notice me? What is something that I'm doing? I'm just doing my own thing, and just kind of, there's a shift there and a more openness. So eventually, by the end of my time with this patient had said that you're one of the best nurses here, and you say things in a way that I can understand. And moving forward to today, so why is this story important to me? It's because it's important for me for many reasons. One is there's a cultural piece with this client, is that this cultural piece and race impacted how this client was perceived and dealt with, and it impacted how that client interacted with the staff. Well, imagine a world if we took that piece away, if we took that cultural piece away, and we're just able to support each other. That would be huge. Now, I study a lot about our nervous system, how our nervous system works, and the intergenerational trauma and traumas holding into our body, how to integrate those, how to let go of those, how to get present, not disassociate. So I really understand the physiology, and then this sociology piece is very interesting. How do you meld the two? How do you take your physiology and your trauma responses and your stress responses and shift those into more present, but at the same time, how do we do that in a cultural shift? Does that make any sense? So right now, you go turn on the news, there is so much trauma, there is so much stress, there's so much tension and anger out there. We are not coherent. We are not in a state of peace. We are not in a state of learning. We are not in a state of connection. We are in a state of anger and projection and perpetrating trauma. From a nervous system point of view, that goes on to intergenerational traumas, that goes on to influencing our epigenetics, it goes on to influencing our current health conditions and chronic health conditions that are super high right now in most major cultures in the world. Fact, it's out there. There's research that chronic conditions are increasing, and all these pieces of the chronic health conditions, our stress and trauma and intergenerational trauma, our epigenetics, and our social construct, and our social I just lost the word, the social part, it's all connected. How do you work on self and work on your well-being with self and increase your well-being and decrease your risks of chronic stress and decrease chronic health conditions, chronic stress? And how do you impact and influence the impact of chronic health conditions on yourself, as well as your family and your smaller community of social network and your broader community, and then the global community? How do we all bring that together? How do we find healing for self to global community? And in some ways, when I think about my practice and things that I teach and educate on, that it's really simple. It's really getting good at a few basic things, a few basic strategies, and really learning the difference between disassociation and being present, and with your interoception, your self-awareness of your body and internal cues, taking all those and getting really, really good at those. And the better you get at those, it impacts your family, it impacts your community, and impacts the global community. So one person doing that in isolation is pretty isolated, and the ripple effect is pretty small. When you get more people together doing very similar things, very similar journeys, and they support each other, and then the people around them, the next circle out, their families, their friends, their co-workers, people they interact with on a regular basis, they start to get influenced by this core group of people. And then there's that domino effect, and then slowly that next third connection of people gets affected, and then it triggers out and triggers out. And what happens is that core group of people becomes like really small, and eventually that core group grows bigger and grows bigger. So that impact of the second and third connections, it gets bigger as well. It's really, really fascinating. And if I were to have a wish for the world, I'd have a wish for the world to learn about your interoception and your self-awareness and your coherence and being present, and identify when you are trauma triggered, stress triggered, and disassociating. That in itself will change a lot from how we interact with others and our different views on different situations that are going on, especially politically and socially. But how do you do that? How do you take one individual to two individuals to smaller communities and grow that community into something bigger? That's the question. I don't think I have the answer for that one. I'm hoping that with time I'll have better insight in that, and I'm hoping that potentially there's other people who have this same idea, who know more about it on the community social side of how we can implement that change. So going back to another story, I was having a conversation today with an Indigenous leader about implementing health strategies in health services, and how do you do it in a culturally sensitive, appropriate way for Indigenous cultures. And it was just it was a really great conversation about how you do it from an individual to community, and not perpetuating trauma, and finding ways to do it in healing, and that people in these roles tend to reach burnout after a couple of years. And how do you do it without the people who take on this work, without them going through burnout? Anyways, I don't have the answers. I just find it all very interesting. I am very curious about it. I'm going to continue to learn about it and continue on this journey. Yeah, so please let me know if you have any thoughts, any opinions, please let us know. It's really help. Let's help learn about this through community. This is one step at a time on how to get there. Thank you for your time. Remember, there's some emails and things coming up. Make sure that you're paying attention, see all the upcoming events and other conversations that we are going to have. Look forward to the next one. If you have any topics or ideas of what we can talk about or what my opinion is on something, let me know. Thank you. Talk to you later.